They had ended 10,000 civilizations before they ever learned humanity's name. The Galactic Tribunal was not a court in any sense that required fairness or evidence or mercy. It was older than the concept of law itself, assembled in the first billion years of the universe by species so ancient they no longer had bodies, only will, only weight, only the cold mathematical certainty that the galaxy ran better when its more dangerous experiments were periodically cleaned away. Their process was elegant in its simplicity. A civilization reached a threshold of expansion. The tribunal convened. The evidence was reviewed. The verdict was rendered. And then the enforcement armada, 1,000 ships, each one larger than a moon, each one carrying weapons that operated on principles most species never lived long enough to theorize about, simply arrived. No negotiation, no appeal, no second chances. The process had never taken longer than 6 hours from verdict to silence. 10,000 times. Not once had a single civilization done anything that required the tribunal to pause, to reconsider, to feel even a fraction of a second's hesitation. They begged. Every single one. The Hyvari begged with music. They broadcast a symphony across 17 star systems in the final hours. Something so beautiful that 3 tribunal observers requested it be preserved before the Armada completed its work. It was preserved. Then the work was completed. The Delenti begged with mathematics. They transmitted proofs of their cultural complexity, their scientific achievements, their irreplaceable contributions to galactic knowledge. The tribunal logged the transmissions, acknowledged the complexity, and rendered the same verdict it always rendered. The Seth did not beg at all. They attacked. Their entire military, every weapon they had ever built, launched in a final desperate offensive against the Armada. It lasted 11 minutes. The tribunal noted their defiance in the official record as an interesting deviation. Then the Armada finished its work. 10,000 civilizations. 10,000 verdicts. 10,000 silences. The tribunal had seen courage. It had seen brilliance. It had seen species face the end with extraordinary dignity and devastating creativity. It had never been surprised. Not once in 10 billion years of operation had any species, facing the extinction order, done something the tribunal had not already seen a version of somewhere in its vast, meticulous, perfectly organized records. Earth's file had been opened 14 months ago. The species was unremarkable, young, violent, chaotic, still confined to a single solar system, still arguing among themselves about things the tribunal found cosmically trivial. The extinction order had been authorized without debate. The Armada was already en route. The 6-hour clock had started. And then, with 5 hours and 51 minutes remaining, the tribunal's chief communications officer flagged something that caused every member of a body that had not experienced confusion in 3 billion years to go completely, utterly, profoundly still. Earth had responded. Not with music, not with mathematics, not with weapons, with a document. 47 pages. And on the cover page, in perfect galactic standard, that no human should have been able to speak, were 4 words that would be debated by scholars for the next 10 million years. Page 1 said simply, "Regarding your extinction order." The document did not come from a government. It did not come from a military installation, a space agency, a committee of world leaders hastily assembled in some underground bunker as the Armada's signature appeared on long-range sensors. It came from a single laptop, in a single apartment, in a city called Lagos, Nigeria, on the 4th floor of a building whose elevator had been broken for 11 months. Adaeze Okonkwo was 31 years old, had been dismissed from the International Legal Consortium for what her former supervisor described as a pathological inability to accept that some problems did not have legal solutions, and had been living on instant noodles and cold tea for the better part of 6 months while working on something that everyone in her life had agreed, with increasing desperation, to stop asking about. She had 17 notebooks. Not digital files, physical notebooks, filled front to back and then sideways in the margins, rubber-banded together in stacks on every available surface in her apartment, each one dedicated to a different section of what she called, in the privacy of her own obsessive mind, the case. She had started building it 3 years ago, not because she knew the tribunal was coming. She did not know the tribunal was coming. She had started building it because she had stumbled across a fragment of intercepted deep space communication that no one in any official scientific institution had been willing to take seriously, and because Adaeze Okonkwo had a condition that her therapist called pathological persistence and that she called being right. The fragment was 14 lines of mathematical notation. It had taken her 8 months to decode it. What it contained, when she finally cracked the last sequence at 3 a.m. on a Wednesday, with cold tea going warm beside her keyboard, was not a message. It was a legal framework. Ancient, vast, internally consistent, and almost certainly the foundational document of whatever governing body had been watching this solar system for longer than humanity had been building fires. She did not tell anyone. She read it 400 times instead, and then she started looking for the loopholes. There were 47. She found the first one in month 2, the last one in month 31. She had been awake for 40 hours when the sky changed, when every satellite feed, every news broadcast, every screen on the planet simultaneously showed the same thing. 1,000 ships, each one larger than anything humanity had ever built, dropping out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the solar system with the patient, unhurried certainty of something that had done this before and expected it to be over quickly. The world had 6 hours. Every government, every military, every scientist with access to any kind of communication system began transmitting simultaneously. Offers of surrender, pleas for negotiation, desperate broadcasts of humanity's greatest achievements, its art, its music, its mathematics. The noise was extraordinary. It was also, Adaeze knew with cold and absolute certainty, completely useless. She had read their legal framework 400 times. She knew exactly what they had seen before. She opened her laptop. She had 47 arguments, 47 pages, and 5 hours and 43 minutes. She began to type. Outside her window, the sky was full of ships. Inside her apartment, surrounded by 17 notebooks and the wreckage of 6 months of obsessive solitary work, Adaeze Okonkwo did not look at the ships once. There was no time for fear. There was only the document. And somewhere in the cold silence between stars, in a chamber that had not registered genuine uncertainty in 3 billion years, something in the tribunal's processing architecture flagged an anomaly in the incoming transmission and escalated it automatically to every member simultaneously. The document was 47 pages long. It was formally structured. It cited their own legal framework against them, the framework they had written, the framework no species had ever decoded, the framework that was supposed to be unbreakable, with a precision that should have been impossible for a species that had only known it existed for 31 months. The chief arbiter read the cover page. Read it again. Looked at the 47-page document sitting in the tribunal's inbox with 5 hours and 31 minutes remaining on the extinction clock, and said, in a voice that had not carried anything resembling surprise in longer than most civilizations had existed, "What is this?" Adaeze Okonkwo stared at her screen for exactly 4 seconds after she hit send. 4 seconds of absolute stillness, of silence so complete she could hear the hum of her laptop fan and the distant sound of her city doing what cities do. Living, breathing, completely unaware that one woman on the 4th floor of a building with a broken elevator had just filed the most important legal document in the history of existence. Then she picked up her cold tea, took a sip, made a face because it was terrible, and opened her second document. She had not stopped at 47 arguments. She had 47 primary arguments. She also had 63 supporting exhibits, 11 mathematical appendices, and a supplementary brief she called, in the margin of Notebook 14, the part where I explain why their own rules make them wrong. She began uploading the exhibits. Outside, the world was ending. Inside apartment 4C, the work continued. The tribunal's first response arrived in 22 minutes. It was not a concession. It was a challenge, a formal legal objection to argument 11, citing a precedent from a ruling made 4 billion years ago involving a species called the Maran, who had attempted something vaguely similar and failed completely. Adaeze had read about the Maran. She had dedicated the entirety of Notebook 7 to the Maran. she had found 3 critical distinctions between the Marin's case and humanity's case that the tribunal's precedent did not account for, and she had pre-written the response to this exact objection 6 weeks ago. She sent it in 4 minutes. The tribunal took 11 minutes to respond to that, then 8 minutes, then 5. The exchange was accelerating. The clock read 3 hours and 40 minutes. And in the observation galleries of the tribunal chamber, filled with representatives of 400 civilizations who had come to witness what they had been told would be a routine extinction, who had brought their cultural observers and their historical recorders and their philosophical commentators to document the end of one more unremarkable species. Something extraordinary was beginning to happen. They had stopped talking among themselves. Every observer, every representative, every historian and philosopher and cultural witness in that vast chamber had gone silent and still, their attention locked on the legal exchange scrolling across the chamber's display in real time, because they were watching something none of them had ever seen. Not the arguments themselves, extraordinary as those were, devastating as each one landed, precise as the legal demolition was becoming with every exchange. What they were watching was the tribunal, responding, retreating, recalculating. The enforcement armada received its first hold order at the 2-hour mark, a procedural pause, technically required when a formal legal challenge reached a certain threshold of validity. The armada had never received a hold order before. Its commanders did not immediately understand what the instruction meant, because the instruction had existed in their operational code for 3 billion years as a pure formality, a legal placeholder, a mechanism that existed on paper because the framework required it, and that everyone understood would never actually be used. It was being used. Argument 31 broke the tribunal's third objection completely. Argument 38 introduced a principle so foundational, so embedded in the tribunal's own constitutional framework, that 3 members immediately requested a full procedural review. The clock hit 40 minutes. Then 20. Then the moment arrived. The moment that the observers in the gallery would spend the rest of their lives trying to describe to species who had not been there, who had not felt the exact quality of silence that fell over that chamber when the chief arbiter of the Galactic Tribunal, a being of such ancient authority that the concept of being wrong had simply never applied to it, looked at argument 47 and understood, with a clarity that was almost physical in its impact, that the document was correct, not partially correct, not correct with reservations, correct. Their own framework, applied with perfect precision, by a species they had scheduled for extinction, who had decoded their foundational legal document in 31 months, who had found 47 loopholes in a system designed to have none, who had done all of this alone, in an apartment with a broken elevator, on cold tea and instant noodles, with 17 notebooks and a condition someone had once called pathological persistence. The extinction order was suspended with 9 minutes remaining. Not cancelled, suspended, pending a full review that the tribunal's own rules now required. The Armada turned around. And Adaeze Okonkwo, who had not slept in 53 hours, who had not looked out her window once in the last 6 hours, who had cold tea and empty notebook pages, and the quiet, devastating satisfaction of a woman who had been told her entire life that some problems did not have legal solutions, closed her laptop, walked to her window for the first time, and watched 1,000 moon-sized ships turn slowly away from everything she had ever loved. She did not celebrate. She opened notebook 18. Humanity had been given a reprieve, not a pardon. The review would take time. The tribunal would regroup. The framework would need to be argued again, deeper, further, to its absolute foundation. There was more work to do. There was always more work to do. That was the thing about humanity that the tribunal, in 10 billion years of operation, had never once encountered and could not have predicted. We did not stop. Not when we won. Not when we lost. Not when the ships turned around and the world outside erupted into the kind of celebration that shook buildings. We went back to work. Because somewhere in the stars, something ancient and cold and absolutely certain of its own authority was reading 47 arguments for the first time, and realizing, with a dread it had no name for, that this was only the opening brief,